Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. It's called Make ScreenFlows More User-Friendly with Unofficial SF Resources. My name is Rebecca, and I'm with Upper Sigma. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Alan Moy. So, Alan is a Executive Director of the Pacific Coast Farmers Market Association, which is a non-profit organization serving nearly 250 California farmers by operating and promoting more than 50 certified farmers markets in the San Francisco City Bay area. Alan joined PCFMA in 2003, bringing over 15 years of experience in non-profit organizations. He's been an accidental Salesforce admin for over 7 years. Okay, so today's session will start shortly. A recorded version of this webinar will be available through YouTube in about 2 weeks. So we'd love to hear from you during this session. The chat will be monitored by the lovely Robin. And for those of you joining us now, welcome. Again, it's the Make ScreenFlows More User-Friendly with Unofficial SF Resources. And I'd like to hand over to Alan.
Thank you, Rebecca. So as Rebecca said, I am an accidental admin. I'm not Salesforce certified. So for those of you who showed up today expecting a technical presentation, I'm sorry, that's not what I've got planned for you. But my hope is that what I can do is share how admins without a lot of formal technical training can use open source solutions in their Salesforce flows to improve their user experience. So as a reminder, the sessions is made possible through the support of the event sponsors. My organization uses a number of these in our own Salesforce org. So if you have time, please check them out. So as Rebecca said, we're a nonprofit organization operating farmers markets in the San Francisco area. In a typical year, such as a year without a raging pandemic, we operate 50 weekly farmers markets in 6 counties. Our markets support 250 California farmers, more than 200 other small businesses, and support over 3 million customer visits each year. So we first began using Salesforce in 2016, replacing a homegrown system in Microsoft Access. So our switch happened because we found that we needed a modern, scalable, and customizable approach that allows us to know which farmer is in which market during which season of the year. And at that time, there were just no commercial packages available designed to support our unique needs. So again, we ended up building our own system, but this time on the Salesforce platform. But since that initial build, we've expanded our use of Salesforce. Today, it also manages our email contact list of over 26,000 active subscribers. It tracks our marketing impact, and it tracks the contracts and permits that we need to operate our farmers markets. We even use it to accept applications from potential new employees. When we first began using Salesforce, our interface was Salesforce Classic, and we used an outside contractor to help get us started. That contractor set up some flows that ran behind the scenes to automate some of our routine actions, but our users never interacted directly with the flows. When we transitioned to Lightning, we saw the opportunity to bring flows out from the shadows and to use ScreenFlows to enhance our user experience. So today, ScreenFlows automate many of our complex processes, and flows have replaced the standard new buttons on many custom objects. These flows lead users through multiple small steps when creating a new record, rather than simply having them input into a single screen. One of the biggest advantages that we have found to utilizing ScreenFlows is that they allow us to put safeguards in place to protect data integrity in a way that is more user-friendly than relying just upon record types or validation rules. As we've begun to leverage the Salesforce app to support our teams who are working out in the field at our farmers markets, we've also found that ScreenFlows can make the mobile use much more intuitive and much more easy to complete, because often we find our teams are trying to input things one-handed or simply one-thumbed. And so having a simplified screen, which we can set up with the ScreenFlow, really helps with that. So on my path to becoming an accidental admin and my first use of Salesforce, I was terrified at the prospect of installing anything into my Salesforce org that did not come from the Salesforce App Exchange. But over time, as my experience with Salesforce has grown, I began to better understand what these third-party apps can and can't do. I have become more comfortable bringing in outside resources that don't have the API seal of approval. This is a decision that we all need to make up for ourselves. So you as a Salesforce admin, you need to assess your own comfort level with installing something from a private listing. These installs do require a leap of faith, as the code assembled by many developers can be masked. So you can't see everything that it's designed to do. If the code is part of an open source project, that makes it easier, but that assumes that you're going to have the time to devote to wanting to review someone else's Apex code. I definitely recommend that you vet any of the sources for your installs and that you try them out in your sandbox before you install them into your production org. But one of the sources that I have come to trust is Unofficial SF. In part, that trust is due to the persons behind the project who are very active and well-respected in the Salesforce ecosystem. Every flow extension that I've installed from Unofficial SF is one that I have first tested in my sandbox. Through that testing, I've determined that the benefit that the flow extension has to bring to my org, increase the efficiency of my processes, outweighs any risks associated with installing it from outside the App Exchange. So installing from Unofficial SF works just like any other Salesforce install. You log in using your credentials for your Salesforce org or your sandbox, select the access level for the app, and you're presented with a big yellow warning reminding you that you're not installing from the App Exchange. Once you give permission for the components to be installed, you may get the familiar message that this app is taking a long time to install, which I find to be normal with just about every install from the App Exchange or elsewhere. Once you receive an email letting you know that the install was completed successfully, you'll be able to see it in your org. Anything that you install from Unofficial SF appears on the installed packages page of setup for your Salesforce org or sandbox, just like anything that you would bring in from the App Exchange. So from there, you can also install it, look into it to see how it's built, and investigate it further. So I do want to advise that it is important to take the time to read the full page of the description for each of these installs before you do them, including the technical details, and sometimes even getting down into some of the Q&A that's at the bottom of the page. I have found that sometimes before you install a component from Unofficial SF, they may ask you to install one of their base packs. So those need to be there before you install the component that you're most interested in. So definitely take a look at that to make sure that you're installing things in the correct order. There may also be some security settings or permissions needed that to give your users access to the components. So to demonstrate what the Unofficial SF resources can bring to your flows, I want to share a use case that first led me to use the site. In California, state law only allows farmers growing within the state to sell at farmers markets, and the law only allows farmers to sell products that they are growing themselves. To prove what they are growing, farms are inspected by their local county, and the farms are issued a document called the Certified Producer Certificate. That certificate lists everything the inspector verified is growing on the farm. These certificates often contain dozens and dozens of items across multiple pages. Our goal was to summarize this information into a custom Salesforce object to make it easier for our team to know what each farmer grows. Details about the document, such as the county that issued it and the expiration date, are recorded in a custom producer document object. The products listed on that document are recorded in a custom child object called Farmers Market Product. Our initial input was tedious, but with the combined efforts of a number of staff members, we got it done. But then we were faced with the prospect of maintaining the information. These certificates are renewed annually and often reflect significant changes as farmers adjust their crop mix to respond to consumer demands. When kale stopped being talked about as a superfood, some farmers stopped planting kale and switched to other products. Those changes were reflected on their certified producer certificates, and those changes then needed to be reflected in our Salesforce data. So I began building a flow to support the updates of these certificates by using what I already knew and by utilizing Salesforce's built-in flow components. Those of you with experience with flows know that they are very powerful tools to support the lookup of records and their related records. If you build flows, you know that the primary way in which you interact with multiple records is by using the loop component that moves with each record in your lookup one at a time and takes action on that record. In our use case, that means that for each certificate that we wanted to update, the flow would loop through each individual produce item to allow our users to determine if it should be kept on the renewed certificate or removed. While this would get us the information we need, it is a slow and tedious process for our users. An alternative that we tried is using the built-in record choice set. This allows you to display the results of a lookup as a series of checkboxes or radio buttons that users can select from. For all the records selected, the users can take a single action. This works, but we found a high error rate. So I have a quick video that shows how this flow appeared to users, so you can see why I decided a change was needed. I haven't had a chance to test this in the conference format yet, so if you find that you're unable to hear the narration from the video, please let us know through the chat, and I'll try to do the narration live instead.
Let's take a look at the iterative version of the flow for the installation of unofficial resources. This flow, we look up records and then present them to the users in a screen. In this case, the products that the farmers are growing appear as a record choice set in a checkbox group. For the users, that turns into a list that looks like this. They can select as many as they would like to take action on. But when they reach the bottom of the list, instructions that tell them what that action should be have moved off of the page. Also, if the user wants to add additional products to the list, it requires an additional step that they would get to by clicking this radio.
So our solution to those challenges that we found was the dual list box flow screen component from Unofficial SF. This component takes the same information that we'd previously put into the record choice set and instead displays it, and that it is displayed as checkboxes, and instead it displays it as two side-by-side boxes. To see the long lists, the items scroll within the box instead of scrolling the entire screen. So I have a video that shows how the updated version appeared to my users. The flow was updated, replacing the checkbox on screen with the dual list box flow screen component on Unofficial SF. These components, one loaded into your Salesforce board, appear on the left and can be dragged onto your screens. They require the setting up certain parameters. In this case, I had to set up a variable list for what I want to appear in each of the boxes. This is how it appears to the user. I set it so that the list shows all potential products for all farms on the left, and those products already assigned to a farm on the right. Users can update these using tools familiar to them from Salesforce's multi-select thickness by simply clicking on objects and moving them back and forth. In this case, Poland does not remove the instructions, and adding a new product does not require the addition of another step as it did previously. Okay, I promise that's the last video. So you can see in that brief snippet, the screen with the dual list box provided a much improved user experience. The process of verifying, adding, and removing selections is now accomplished on a single screen instead of multiple screens. Items that I want to add are moved from the left to the right, while items that I want to delete are moved from the right to the left. The user can also scan the list from top to bottom to easily ensure its accuracy before proceeding to the next screen. Since moving to this new version, we have found an increase in productivity, partially because our staff no longer dreads doing the updates, but also because we've seen a decrease in errors. So in the time that I have left, before we open for questions, I want to share a few more components from Unofficial SF that I'm excited about and that we are using internally to make our flows more powerful. So the data table component allows you to display multiple fields from a single record in a familiar table format. If you remember the checkbox group of products that I shared early in the presentation, that list only allowed one field to be displayed for each selection. Using the data table component, you can add multiple fields, which makes it easier to ensure that users are taking action on the correct record. In addition to flow screen components, the contributors to Unofficial SF have also built components that run entirely in the background. One of those useful components is commit transaction. As you may have noticed in the examples that I shared, we have built a complex custom data structure to manage our information. Often the data we're working with doesn't always have a parent-child relationship. Sometimes it's grandparent-grandchild or second cousin once removed type relationship. Building flows to support processes in an org with a very complex data structure often requires a significant number of steps. Every action that occurs, especially if that action occurs within a loop, means you could easily face the limit of 2,000 actions per flow. When that limit is hit, the flow stops and rolls back any changes that it may have made. The commit transaction can help in these situations. For example, if your flow regularly hits the limit after processing around 250 records, you can add a counter to your loop and then a decision element. If your counter is under 250, then the flow continues to process records. But when the counter hits 249, the decision element directs the flow to the commit transaction component. From there, you use an assignment component to reset your counter and then continue the loop with the next record. The loop then continues until it either hits 249 again or it runs out of records. So this is an easy way to help get around those limitations and work with much larger data sets. With inflows, record sets that are generated by the get records flow component are referred to as collections. The unofficial SF site has a single installable package that contains several components that make it easier for you to work with these collections. For example, the standard get records flow component allows you to sort the records that are found. However, it only allows sorting on a single field. If you'd like to sort on multiple fields, the sort collection component allows you to designate each of those fields, the order in which those fields are sorted, how each individual field is sorted, either ascending or in descending order. Finally, there's a component that imports a CSV file and takes action on the records. While there are many import tools available, what is unique about this component is that it's embedded in a flow, so it can harness the power of flows to manipulate the data before it is used to create or update records in Salesforce. We use this component to speed up the importing of electronic transactions that take place in our farmers markets. The app that processes transactions for those on the SNAP Public Benefit Program allows us to export a CSV file of all transactions in a single week. We import that data into Salesforce using this component. The flow then uses formula fields to translate the terms delivered by the finance app into Salesforce IDs, so the imported records appear in context. So as you can tell, I'm a fan of the unofficial SF resources, but I do want to be clear that there are some challenges with using them in your flows. First, while the volunteers creating these flow extensions are great programmers, doing something that I don't have the skill or time to take on myself, they aren't always the best writers. As a result, you may find that instructions are somewhat limited or make reference to steps using terms that may be clearer to developers, but not as always clear to admins. Sometimes setting up the flow extension properly requires a lot of trial and error in your sandbox before it does what it promises to do. I do want to add that I have seen a marked improvement in the documentation and the descriptions as the new packages are coming out. So while that's still a concern for me, I definitely want to give props to those who are working to make sure that that it becomes more user-friendly going forward. And second, while the community is working to improve these extensions, the package often require manual updates to take advantage of new features, and sometimes the developer may choose to deprecate a flow package and release an entirely new version. Switching to the updated version requires you to replace the component in every flow where you've used it, which can be time-consuming and tedious. Finally, you may also find that a flow extension that you have installed from unofficial SF or elsewhere may eventually have a similar counterpart that is the standard flow component provided by Salesforce. Lookups and flows is definitely one of those. Unofficial SF had a lookup component for flows before Salesforce released one. Once there's an official Salesforce version, you may want to consider replacing the custom component in your flows to ensure that the component remains compatible in future Salesforce updates. So as we end the session, I want to leave you with resources that I find helpful. As I said, most of what I know about Salesforce is self-taught. And so when I face a challenge that I'm not sure how to solve, or when I'm looking for inspiration about how to make Salesforce more user-friendly for my team, these are some of the resources that I go to. So thanks to all of you anonymous people out there, hopefully there actually are some, for tuning in and listening to my flow story. And so I will now pause and we can take some questions from the audience. But please remember, I'm neither a developer nor a Salesforce employee, so I won't be able to answer every question about what is possible or what is on the roadmap, but I am happy to share my experience working with flows and integrating flow extensions.
Hi. You have quite a few questions, Alan. Thank you very much for your presentation today. That was great. A little word, the audio in the recorded section was not working. Hi. Okay. So if you can... questions, Alan. Thank you very much for your presentation today. That was great. A little word, the audio is not... Okay. So if you can... thank you very much for your presentation today. That was great.
Not sure why I'm getting that echo from you, Robin. Let's see. Not sure what, so you can try. Okay.
Okay, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I think there are many questions. So Anita Lavea would like to know, is flows the way to go now as opposed to Process Builder? And there are some questions about whether or not there are any security concerns about using the unofficial Salesforce.
So from what I have been reading through a number of Salesforce blogs is that Flow is the future, and that they are actually adding additional enhancements into Flow that will allow it to do some of the things that previously you could only do in Process Builder. For example, I believe in Process Builder, you could set a time so that after a record is updated, at some point in the future, there would be another action taken. They're adding that type of capability into flows. So the recommendation is that to think about flows as the future process. What I've heard is that Process Builders are not going away anytime soon, but they may reach the point where they're no longer building new functionality into Process Builder. And in terms of security concerns, yeah, that's, as I said, what I definitely feel that it's important for you to vet the source of the component before you put it in, and to test it in your sandbox. One of the turning points for me in getting more comfortable with this is when I realized that what I would be getting from unofficial SF was not that different from what I'd gotten from a contractor that I had paid to develop something for me. It ends up in the same place in my Salesforce org. And while I had some confidence in the contractors that I had paid to build something for me, I was not going through and vetting their code. So there was that element of trust. So with unofficial SF, I've come to that same conclusion. So part of it is, as I have, there's a couple of blogs that I follow in terms of Salesforce resources. And when I started seeing references multiple times to unofficial SF and to some of the people who were contributing to it, that gave me a lot more confidence that the people that are developing these tools know what they're doing, and so that I can trust the products that they're putting together.
Well, thanks. That's a great answer. Adrian McHugh would like to know if this is something that would work for foundations and tracking grants received from a foundation.
So I think the tools that they provide allow you to rethink how you organize the information for your users. So it can be used for any purpose that you can imagine. So the most important thing, I think, in any process is to first sketch it out. What is the information that you want your users to interact with? How is it organized? And what is it that is important for them to see at one time? So that way you can choose the tool that helps to accomplish that most effectively. So for instance, when I showed the data table tool, one of the challenges that we have by operating so many markets per week is that there are often things that we want to track, or that have many things that happen on the same day. The same farmer may be in 3 different markets on the same day. So if I want someone to interact with a record, I can't simply show them a date. They also need to know, they need to see the where and the when at the same time. That's something that's very difficult to do with the record choice set that's built into flows. So by switching out the presentation of that data by using the data table tool, I'm able to show multiple fields. So it's really about what is it that you want that your users need to see, and how can you get that to them in the easiest way possible? Otherwise, the flow tools are agnostic. They can present any type of data that is important to you and to your users.
That's great. The flexibility is powerful. Mark Jones asked, from the resources you've shared, what would you say is your favorite to use?
So I think that's favorite to use, I'll have to say, is the newest version of Data Table that I just installed for the first time yesterday, because version 3 is a marked improvement in usability at the admin level. while still providing the same function at the user level that my users have come to expect. Just tried it in my sandbox last night on a new project that I'm working on. I'm very excited about that. Outside of that, I have, the commit transaction has been a game changer for us because, for instance, like I mentioned, we have 26,000 people on our email list. So we will often generate email coupons that we send to them, and we want to track how many of those coupons get back and then do some analysis of who is most likely to respond to this type of marketing campaign. So if we're creating 26,000 records in Salesforce, we're not going to do those one at a time. We want a flow to do that. And if we can only do 2,000 at a time, even that is somewhat onerous. So being able to use the commit transaction tool to make that flow more efficient has definitely been a game changer for a lot of my team.
Okay, you need to be known as the evangelist of flow. Okay, we have a question from Salvatore Saya. He says, sorry if I misunderstood using flow loop. Did I hear that maximum items you can loop is 250?
No, so that was an example that I used. So the flow limit is 2,000 actions, but there are multiple things that count towards the actions. So one of the things that they advise as a best practice is don't do a lookup inside of a lookup. But sometimes if you're working with related records, it's very difficult to get around that. But when you have a lookup inside of a lookup and then you're trying to take actions, that can very quickly add up to the 2,000 actions that you're allowed within the flow. And though that limit is there because you recognize we're all sharing the same Salesforce resources online. So and make sure that no one's hogging the resources to the extent that your Salesforce org slows down considerably because you happen to be on the same server. So it makes sense that it's there, but we're all going to try to find our workarounds to make sure that despite those limits, we get what we need in the most efficient way possible. So my example was using 249. It's just a number that I picked up out of the air. The official limit from Salesforce is 2,000 actions per flow.
Thank you. And then Sheila Walsh. Oh, I'm sorry, I think she actually had that answered. Stephen McClure asks, can a screen flow be called from Process Builder or another flow?
Yes, so it can be called from Process Builder. Calling from a flow is actually something that I've started to do a lot more of now that they call it a subflow. And it's a really great way when you have complex processes to break them up into smaller pieces. So that way you don't have a huge conglomeration of arrows on your screen that make it difficult to figure out. Rather, you can segment it into smaller pieces. So perhaps depending on what the user says they want to do, there's this one subflow that creates records and a separate subflow that deletes records. And that way it allows you that if you need to make an update and once you realize that where something needs to be enhanced, or there's an error that's popping up, you can more quickly target where it is that you need to devote your time versus looking at one huge flow.
That's great. Carla Este asks, have you found an easy way to update or upgrade the data table?
I'm not sure what she means. So the data table component, what I found is that for instance, right now in my production org, I'm running version 2. The one I tried out in the sandbox, version 3. What I think I need to do is have that open on 2 tabs and essentially run through each of the setup or the elements that I put into the data version 2 component and just make sure that I've put the identical ones into version 3. That's what I think I'm going to need to do. I think she's talking about how to move when one version gets deprecated and there's a new version you need to install. I think those are the steps that I would follow.
Okay, she extended the question to say when she's used it before, she's had difficulty upgrading versions.
Okay, yeah, so it is. So if that's the version issue, yeah, that's what I found. And one of the advantages of the version 3 is that there's what I found is there's a tool that allows you as the admin it presents a list of fields on the screen, and you select those, and then say what order they want to be in. Version 2, you do the same thing, but you are typing or copying in the API names for each field in the order you want them to appear. So that if that is you don't mind taking that step manually, perhaps version 3 isn't something that you want to jump to right now.
Salvador has a follow-up question. Limits are there for the governor limit, is that correct?
Yes, the governor limit is what I'm referring to.
Okay. Daniel Maldonado, how hard is it to work with the external databases in a flow?
I don't work with external databases in Flow, so I don't have experience with that. Everything that I've been working with is manipulating data that's in my Salesforce org.
Okay. I think that's all of our questions. If I missed anyone, please feel free to reach out to Alan. Alan, was there anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Just thanks everyone for tuning in. Just remember that if I can do it, you can do it. So, having big props to Salesforce for making a visual interface that allows those of us who aren't programmers to essentially, because it writes code for us in the background, and it's a huge benefit to all of us to help take Salesforce from something designed for the for-profit world and really make it work for the unique needs of our individual orgs and the nonprofit community. So I give them props for doing that, and don't open up a sandbox and don't be afraid to play with it. The nice thing is that if you break a sandbox, you click the refresh button, and it's like it never ever happened.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.